Отже, всім дякую, що
Thank you
ви
for
нас
joining us. Thank you for another presentation
програми
of
МВФ та
the
підтримки від ЄС.
monitoring
Працюємо над цим
of
проєктом
implementation of the
разом з
IMF program
незалежними
and the
організаціями,
EU
називається
assistance. There are
Consortium
four
RRR4U
organizations. We are known
і
as the RRR4U, Recovery, Resilience, and Reconstruction for Ukraine. I am Maria Rybko. I am a moderator. I am a deputy director of the Center for Economic Strategy. And the first panelists will be representatives of these organizations, those who are responsible for the monitoring. This project is supported by the International Renaissance Foundations. This event is in Ukrainian, but we also have simultaneous interpretation. I think it's time for us to start. And actually, we didn't know whether we will have the Plan Ukraine published, and we were really lucky that within just several days or hours before our event, we actually had the publication of the plan Ukraine. That is why we can unpack it today. I would like to introduce the first panelist, Maxim Samoluk, an economist from the Center for Economic Strategy, Victoria Kovalenko, a representative of Dixie Group, Alexandra Petli, the Institute for Economic Studies and Consultations, and Vyacheslav Kurylo, who's an analyst of the Center of Analytics and Advocacy of the Institute of Advocacy and Analytics. So I would kindly ask Max to start with our key findings of the monitoring. Thank you, Maria. I would like to welcome all the colleagues. I am Maxim Samoluk. I am an economist in the Center for Economic Strategy. I would like to briefly tell you about our agenda and what are the issues raised today. Our organization, together with our partner organization, within the framework of RR4U, is engaged in the project related to monitoring, related to commitments that we have for the IMF and the EU. So we will continue discussing how successful our cooperation is and also about those achievements that we already have pertaining to the commitments undertaken. Also, we will talk about the plan Ukraine, which has been published recently. We will focus on what it means for us and what are some future steps to be taken. And also, there will be another important topic, and we will talk about midterm budget planning in cooperation with the IMF, but we will delve deeper into that during this event. I would like briefly to state that what is the most important thing about this event and in general, if to speak about our economic life, we understand that there is a lot of financial assistance which is needed for Ukraine to be able to fight, to be able to withstand, and also how do we attract those amounts which are needed in terms of budgeting. And we know that we need at least 37.3 billion of US dollars. This is a very significant sum of money, and we do not have this money in our hands. And actually, there are very many heated discussions in the US right now about these sums of money, and we cannot influence that. But we know that a lot directly depends on us being committed, on keeping our promises and our promises to our partners and to ourselves. 5 billion from dollars from the IMF, 16 billion from the European Union. To receive the majority of the funds, we need to actually follow certain terms, and also the World Bank will contribute at least 1.5 billion from the World Bank. And we understand that here we need some legislation, and we are stuck with some of these laws. They were still waiting for them to be signed by the president, because if they are signed today, that means that we will receive 1.5 billion from the World Bank. However, we understand that there is a lot of attention needed and a lot of effort, and that is exactly what we are going to be discussing today. Thank you. Yes, if I may, thank you, Maxim, for this intro. And I think that we can move on to Ukraine EU facility and Ukraine plan. Before that, we had monitoring for the IMF program. That was a frame program about Ukrainian reforms, and mostly everything revolved around the IMF program. But we are going to have another another topic. This is Ukraine facility and also the plan about Ukraine facility and what it is, and actually Victoria Kovalenko will tell us more because she's a representative of Dixie Group. She works with sustainable development. We also have Oleksii Sobolev, Deputy Minister of Economy, who was responsible for development of this plan. And Oleksii will tell us more about this plan. But we start with Victoria. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, dear colleagues. And yes, Oleksii has already joined us. That is why I will not take up much of your time. We have a program which is called Ukraine Facility, which envisages provision of financial assistance to Ukraine within the period of 4 years. And there are three different pillars which are mentioned here: budgeting, investment, also technical assistance, and we will receive the money within 4 years. 2028 is the last year for receiving funding if we fulfill all their commitments undertaken. And also, there is a mechanism of transitional budgeting amounting to 6 billion euros. And this week has been a very dynamic and intense pertaining to Ukraine facility. Yesterday, the European Commission has allocated the first tranche of 4.5 billion of euros in aid. And thanks to this assistance, the EU provides a much needed support to Ukraine. 1.5 billion will be received by Ukraine in April, following all the terms that I will tell you about later. And also, we will receive almost 2 billion of some front investment. Unfortunately, I cannot change the slide. It seems to be stuck. Also, these three pillars of Ukraine facility, more than 38 billion. So here we actually have 6 billion of bridge financing, 1.9 billion of pre-financing, and 30.37 billion is subject to implementation of the Ukraine plan. 5.27 billion in grants. The second pillar is an investment fund. This is almost 7 billion euros, a special investment instrument uh, to, to attract public and private investment. And the third one is almost 5 billion. This is technical supports for reforms and interest coverage on loans provided to Ukraine in 2020 to 2023. Yes. And here we can focus more on 1.5 billion of pre-financing, which will be provided to us in April by the European Union. There are 5 requirements to receive this money. This is the High Council of Justice competition. Also, we have the government order on approval of the action plan, and we uh, also we have the adoption of the national strategy. What is left is program funds for the introduction of industrial park support, and also protocols of interaction between the state land cadastre and the state register of property rights on real estate to enable data transfer. On the 18th of March, the Cabinet of Ministers adopted the Ukraine plan for a Ukraine facility program, which will be serve as the basis to attract this support during 2024, 2027. Generally, it is 150 indicators and 69 areas of reform that this program is covering. And also, if there are any delays in terms of fulfillment of indicators, the EU will not provide the funding. However, there is some flexibility. Ukraine can use 12 months to meet the indicator. And also, the European Commission will assess the implementation of the commitments on a quarterly basis. And if there is a failure to meet the envisaged indicators in a timely manner, it will mean a delay in financial assistance, and accordingly, it will also impact the budgeting in Ukraine. Thank you, colleagues. Oleksii, are you with us? Is it possible for us to hear from Oleksii right now? Yes, so here we have the team and the person who was responsible for the plan, Oleksii Sobolev, Deputy Minister of Economy of Ukraine. The Ukraine plan is the plan that Oleksii knows best about, and I hope that everything works fine technically and that it will be possible for us to see Oleksii. So we have some technical issues right now. Is everything all right with the sound, Oleksii? Can you hear me, Oleksii? No? Okay. We hope that Oleksii will join us shortly. Meanwhile, I will start the presentation of this part. So, in terms of Ukraine and in terms of the Ukraine plan, there are very many sections, there are very many chapters where the government with experts contributed to the list of reforms, and we have very different indicators. All of them shape 150 indicators that are to be met, and the Ukraine will be accountable before the European Commission. I mean, literally. So there is an indicator, for example, in the budget for 2024, 2025, 2026. We used 800 million for SMEs development. This is one of the indicators, one of the examples that you will see in the Ukraine plan. Also, there are some other examples, the development and adoption of laws, strategies, also the implementation of strategies which presupposes development of roadmaps or some other legal acts or regulations, as well as some internal things. So there are 150 indicators. Once again, they are planned for 2024, 2027, and also decision makers, policy makers, it is their responsibility to meet these indicators on a quarterly basis for us not to have any delays from the European Commission because everything is tied to these indicators. Those three pillars explained by Victoria, they include the state support, 38.27 billion, and these are the reforms needed to receive direct support to the state budget after implementation. And I do hope that we will hear more from Oleksii about these reforms. Unfortunately, we cannot hear Oleksii still. All right, Oleksii is on a business trip, and maybe this is a problem with the internet connection, but on behalf of the Center for Economic Strategy, I promise that there will be a podcast or a separate interview with Oleksii because it is a very comprehensive and complicated topic. It is very multi-layered in all of its dimensions and all of the chapters. That is why I highly recommend all the experts in their sectoral questions, issues, well, agriculture, liquid minerals, or any other fields. It is important for you to understand what is meant by this plan and to participate actively in the discussion. Then the next point in our agenda is Vyacheslav Gorilla, an analyst from the Institute of Analytics and Advocacy, who would tell us more about what happened to the second umbrella area and its implementation. I mean, the program with the IMF. Yes, I have only 5 minutes as a matter of fact, and I understand why I received only this time slot because we haven't seen very many agendas when it comes to this IMF program. That is why it is one slide that you can see here. Well, the most important thing is that we have some agreement about the third review of the program, and we already have some information from the uh, Yaroslav Zheleznyak in one of in on a Telegram channel mentioned that today we will receive some good news. The board of directors will approve this decision, and we will receive another tranche amounting to 880 million, and also we will receive an updated version of the memorandum together with consortia. We continue monitoring those anchors which we had, those which will appear. I mean, if you have any new ones, that is why please follow the news to receive the most updated information.
What concerns the immediate implementation of the structural benchmark, so we had to implement only one benchmark, and we managed to do that. We developed and suggested the measures to increase the budget revenues by 0.5% of GDP. What concerns the future, we have two benchmarks we have to complete by the end of March. One pertains to the 579 program, so we need to prepare a concept note to provide greater support to small and medium-sized enterprises. And another benchmark, this is about the higher anti-corruption courts and optimization of its works. The respective draft law was registered at the Verkhovna Rada, but it's still being processed by the committee. And considering the political crisis at the parliament, we have certain reservations concerning the possibility of adopting that. The next stage is June, when they will consider the benchmarks, which I've mentioned, and also the efficiency criteria. What concerns the second quarter of 2024, there are also three benchmarks to complete, but the one which is most challenging, which looks most challenging, is the restart of the Economic Security Bureau of Ukraine, and this is one of the conditions for Ukraine facility. The Ukrainian parliament actually failed to adopt the governmental draft law, which was heavily criticized by the public and the experts, but there are alternative draft laws which were supported by the business. So we really hope that they will be adopted and some progress will be achieved. To summarize, we should also mention that in addition to IMF program, we also have the Ukraine facility. So we need to activate our efforts as quickly as possible, resolve the political crisis in the parliament, and continue working because our reputation as a reliable partner now is not that good as it used to be. So we need to work more and more efficiently in terms of meeting the commitments. Thank you. Thank you, Vyacheslav. So we still have four benchmarks under the IMF program before the June review. Just a bit left. The Ukraine facility plan. We also have very active preparation for European integration, and we have many reforms to implement. So here you can see that when it comes to the fiscal sector, we have many benchmarks there. And what is interesting when it comes to Ukraine facility, I'll tell you what chapter it is. That's chapter 2. At the public finance management, there are many benchmarks connected with public finance as allocation, uh, of revenue, receiving funds into the budget and also the allocation spending these funds. And an important detail, except the audit, which we will go back to later. I'm now looking at Yaroslav Zheleznyak. But there's another very important detail, that's the midterm budget planning, and all donors say about it, and it has been mentioned many times by all key analytical centers before the war that mid and long-term budgetary planning should be introduced for more efficient use of every hryvnia. As taxpayers, we have to welcome things like that. And now I would like to ask Alexander Bugrish to tell us about the framework within which the midterm budgetary planning was done, and we hope will be done in the future. Thank you, Maria. Yes, so we have been criticized quite frequently, including by us, the Jaspers, that we have short-term budget planning, 1-year budget planning, and 1-year budget planning does not give us the opportunity to plan ahead, does not give us the opportunity to implement strategic programs, and so on. So generally, medium-term budget planning is important because it increases the predictability of policy. So we already know what we will be doing. I mean the government. And it also allows for the coherence between strategic and budget planning. So we have a strategy, we have the money for it, and we implement it. If we don't have the budget for something, that means we cannot implement it, or we need to look for additional funds. Better fiscal discipline, that's another important moment, and better balance of spending needs and debt sustainability concerns. So that's also about fiscal resilience and fiscal sustainability. It's important because we know that in Ukraine we have many laws which will presuppose huge amounts for financing all the things, 10% for science, 10% for education, and so on. But in fact, we don't have this money and we cannot finance it, and we need to balance what we promise to finance and what we can actually finance. And this allows for better monitoring and oversight of expenditure liabilities because we understand what we have financed, what we will be financing in a year or two. And as a result, everybody in the economy tries to understand, well, what will be financed and where additional sources of financing should be found. We all know that we have had, well, this medium-term budget planning was on uh, the agenda for a long time, and well, even the IMF programs contain that, and the government wrote in its letter of intent that we will be implementing medium-term budget planning, but before this program that we have right now, we had no structural benchmarks which would relate to medium-term budget planning. And I was surprised to know about that because I was convinced that we did have them, but there were no benchmarks like that. But it was promised that the government would be doing that. Instead, the government really did some things. In 2018, in December, the budget code was amended. These were very important amendments because they defined the main elements for medium-term budget planning. That's planning for 3 years ahead. For example, if we are in 2024 right now, so the government is now working for the budget declaration for 2025, 2026, and 2027, 3 years ahead to understand what we have money for. And in 2022, instructions were approved on how to prepare the budget declaration. However, this IMF program, which we received last year, a year ago, so we are almost celebrating the first anniversary, we got several benchmarks which initially stated what we have done. So we have res restored the norms in the budget code, which included the medium-term budget planning, because when the full-scale invasion started, we suspended that because we had a lot of indeterminacy. But now we understand that we have to plan something. It's just that we need to have very clear macroeconomic scenarios of war to understand what can we actually allocate in our budget, what can we count for, and it's very important in our communication with the donors, with the IMF, with the European Union, because we see that Ukraine facility, this facility for Ukraine is for 4 years. So it's very important for us to be able to correlate this with the Ukrainian plans, which presuppose reforms for the same period, and that had to be included into the budget declaration. And now the government is developing the budget declaration according to our deadlines. It has to be prepared by the end of May, and I really wish our government good luck in working on this document. They have involved the Ministry of Economy, who does the economic forecast for this declaration. We also have certain economic forecast for Ukraine in general. So the question is whether it will be the same forecast or maybe the information will be partially updated, but we'll see that later. And in addition to that, we have two other benchmarks which are also related to medium-term budget planning. One of them is to study the experience of Ukraine, how we implemented medium-term budget planning. And here I should note that we don't have much experience in this regard. Ukraine developed one budget declaration for 2023, but that was done in 2019, and because of the change of power, because we had a new president elected, then a new parliament elected, so this budget declaration was never adopted, and it was only in 2021 when as the only 3-year budget declaration was adopted. So we have very little experience in that, but we do have it. So we need to take into account the point of view of the budget administrators, and also take into account the macroeconomic forecast, and so on and so forth. And another very interesting benchmark, which we have by the end of this year, is to ensure connection between the budget declaration and medium-term budgets and the capital expenditures, because for many years we had a very big problem of unfinished construction works, unfinished objects, because we have some money for this year, but we have 1 year object budget next year, so we do not allocate money in the next budget, and so on and so forth. So it's very important to do this, and it basically is connected to the benchmark we completed last year. We adopted the roadmap to manage public investment, what is called PIMA in English. This is a great roadmap. If Ukraine manages to improve this pathway towards investments, it will be a great plus, because this is about efficiency and usage in the expenditures. Then when it comes to the medium-term budget planning, it's all about the strategy, and the budget declaration defines the connection between the strategy and the money. And today we have been speaking about several documents which define certain strategy or certain indicators which we will definitely have to finance. So we have the IMF program. This is something we have to do, and I should mention that what is different in this program from other programs is that this program indicates the lower threshold, lower than which we cannot go. So the IMF also understands that when it comes to social expenditures, we cannot go lower than a certain line, and that's what we can do with the help of donors. That's why we need this money from the donors from the European Union, because we don't have enough money to finance everything. If we take the indicators for this year, our internal revenues suffice to finance some security issues, but everything else is financed by the donors' funds. So we need to be very efficient in that, and that is why it was a pity that the plan of Ukraine will actually excluded the reform of the counting chamber, but maybe somebody will here know something about that because it's about efficiency. It's about the audit of funds which we receive from the donors. It's about the trust. And when we speak about the donors, it's all about trust. Why do we need to monitor the benchmarks? What do we need to meet them? What do we need to discuss them with the public to explain why they are important? So what is interesting, and we'd like to thank the government very much, but another person will speak about it in more detail. Reform Matrix was developed. It is published on the website of the Ministry of Finance. This matrix includes all our commitments, not only to the EU and to the IMF, but also to the World Bank, to G7, to the United States, and so on and so forth. So it's all about the reforms. But again, when I'm speaking about the requirements, these have to be our requirements. This is what the government should do for Ukraine to become resilient, strong, and good state. So reform matrix is something we have to implement to become resilient, to start growing, and to make sure that Ukraine is a country where people want to live and to work. Thank you. Thank you, Alexandra. And on my behalf, I'm well, not very good replacement substitution for Oleksii. Is Oleksii here already? Great. Please show us him on screen. Oleksii, can you hear me? Yes, can you hear me? Yes. We are very happy that you found the opportunity to join our event, mainly because this is a very short notice. This plan has just been adopted and sent to the European Commission, and we can start discussing it. So we have three questions about the plan. If I may ask, please give us the answer to all three questions. So within the time that you have. So first, does this plan encompass all the reforms planned by the government, or is it just a part of what the government is planning to do? And this is the promise to the European Commission in exchange to which we will get the funding. So does the scope of this plan meet the scope of all the governmental plan? The second one, what is the most important and most challenging for implementation of this plan? What is important? What is difficult in this plan? And the third question is, unfortunately, we have not seen in the Ukraine plan any events connected with the state audit and the reform of the accounting chamber, but we know that the European Union takes the control of funding very important and very seriously. So how should it be implemented? So these are my three questions. Maybe we will still have time to take some questions from the room and from Zoom users. So if you, by the way, those on Zoom, if you have any questions, please write them in the Q&A section. Well, yes, I have to apologize. I'm here in Brussels and I had some connectivity problems here, but well, this is not a plan of everything. It's integrated into the reforms matrix. And if you have a look, Ukraine promised to do a lot. We have to do a lot, and it's very difficult to do everything because our capacities, the governmental capacity, the parliamentary capacity, and the capacity of the country is very limited because we are at war, but nobody canceled the European integration, and many of these reforms have to be implemented. So this plan, how is it different from the other ones? I don't think we will be able to amend it during this year. If the European Commission adopts it and the member states vote for it and adopt it, the things that are planned for this year have to be 100% implemented. This looks impossible if we have a look at historically how similar planned projects were implemented. It never happened that we implemented everything 100%. All the time we had postponements and things like that. Well, it comes to this program and this document, there is no possibility like that. So I would say that at some point the program is more difficult than everything else because of this peculiarity. Therefore, we will have to do something we have never done before. We have we will have to do everything and not postpone anything because each reform will cost us about 400 millions each indicator for this year. So this is too expensive for the budget to have a whole like that. Now, what concerns the control and supervision of the funding, there is a chapter on that which describes how it will be done. The initial monitoring, the initial audit will be done by the Ministry of Finance, especially when it comes to the reforms. So what concerns the performance of the investment indicators and where we need to control the funds, that's the service and also well they will be doing that in accordance with the requirements of uh, the European Union. And there are some things which are outside of our plans because this is not on our plan on our side. But what concerns the three reforms, well, there is 151 indicator, and well, they are grouped well uh, for 70 reforms, so it's like two indicators per each approximately. And the plus is that it's there. This is a 4-year plan of economic development which exists and will exist. There will be a possibility to amend it next year, and I think that if we do everything right, then it would be good to extend it to make it deeper to continue because this is a good tool. Why? Because it's an integrated plan which says these reforms, these investments into these sectors, all these things have to be done together, and that should result in economic growth. And it's a very useful tool. We are all used to the IMF program, but I think that it's good to have a tool like this because it is also supported by money. And unlike IMF, it's not only money for the reforms, but also money for investment. And that means that we need to do everything we can for this tool to work. And then we will be able to improve it and so on. We can do it next year. I don't think it's going to be a problem. And what concerns the difficult moments, well, I'm not going to speak about everything, but there's a very strong anti-corruption bloc. There has been a lot of have been a lot of heated discussions. So we need to have a look at that. I'm not an expert in that field. What there is the management reform that has to be implemented, but then there will be a very complicated uh, reform for the separation of accounts for many companies with corporatization of many companies, which is in the requirements, and also the registration of the state support and assistance, which is done not in the way that is required. This is done to increase the competition. This is a requirement of the European Union, and we need to meet that.
Yes, that is quite a challenging thing for us, I guess. And I mean, yes, Ukrzaliznytsia reforms, if you really want to have it on the market. Also, the oversight, this is what is being discussed with businesses, not to have more pressure on business, but at the same time to have oversight and control back. Speaking of our experience, what else should I mention? To conclude, technical standards, this is a lot of work to be done, and we are lacking resources. It's very important because we understand that we are pressed for time, speaking of these standards, and that will be another challenge. However, as I mentioned, we have 70 reforms, and they are integral. That is why it's difficult for me to pick only some of them and to focus on them. Yes, thank you, Oleksii. Do we have 3 minutes for a Q&A session? Yes. Colleagues, I will start with the panelists, and then people from the audience. Oleksii, first of all, it's really great that we finally have the document. Congratulations on that. And I wanted to hear once again, if you do not meet something timely, we do not receive the funding. Am I correct? So hence I have a question. What about this pricing or costing or this matrix? Will it be open to everybody? for us as the public to communicate it that if you do not have this reform, if something is not voted for, we lose the money. Is it going to be an open process? And could you explain more about investment indicators? Because we have 4 billion euros allocated for them, but if you follow the schedule, it's 2026, and then at the end you will see something. So what about this part of the deal? So we spend some sum of money and we are compensated for that, or what is the mechanism? Yes, thank you. Everything will be open. This is to start with. There will be no issue about that. We don't have it yet because the member states will approve it together with the plan. So there are different indicators. You could see it in line with different quarters, and the European Commission will prepare a proposal which will be approved. What are the amounts quarterly to be allocated by the end of the plan to be implemented, and then you divide it by indicators quarterly, and then you will see these amounts. And I think that 300, 400 millions, this is the cost of the indicator. And if you do not meet an indicator this quarter, we do not receive funds. Well, this is a gap in our budget, and also we can fulfill it, meet this within the year, but then we'll receive the money. And speaking of other indicators, they cost exactly, you just divide by the number of indicators quarterly. But for us to meet indicators for 2026, we need to start working prior. We need to work on some projects to also integrate it into the budget. And this is quite a challenge. And taking a look at the facility, and also you may find some information in the program, and there will be more information in the frame agreement. Those terms for procurement, they are much more complicated. For instance, there is a separate block where you have it mentioned what kind of countries can participate in these contracts. It will be complicated because that is something which is on top of what we already have. As far as reforms are concerned, the bankruptcy, another thing, and also we have remit on energy sector and many other questions appearing, and but they are very important for our investors, for them to know how and in what way they can invest in green energy, remit some other legislation, also loans, and the reform of state governance. It could be any part that you take, and all of that serves as the backbone for the implementation. And also, I would like to say that this plan presupposes a mix of regulations, but not only, because historically we understand that a law does not always equal every form. For example, if you have agrarian register, 80% of assistance come through this register. So it is one thing to adopt a law for this register, but it is another story to make sure that it translates into some practical results. That is why I think that this is a very nice comprehensive tool, and it is a nice document. It's been developed together with the European Union, which is also important. Yes, uh, let's take some of the questions from the people who are uh, on the ground. One or two questions. May I, Oleksii? Good afternoon, Yuri Dashtatov, RBK Ukraine. With regard to the review of the terms, you mentioned that during the first year, these terms will not be reviewed, revised. So what if there are some other terms or some amendments, some changes introduced? When can it be done? And I have another question. I took a look because I didn't have enough time to read it rigorously, but I can see that some of the requirements, they are not very specific or clear in terms of the content and the deadlines. When we complete their vision of the document, what about those changes to be introduced? What are your expectations about any changes? And also, this is something I don't understand. Why did the cabinet of ministers have um, to approve it, as it is not a final version of it? Yes, this is the final version actually. Let's approve what we have, and then we will see what happens next. Also, there was the approval of the Cabinet of Ministers, and there are two options. Either it will be approved, endorsed by the state members. If no, then there will be a negotiation phase for 1 month maximum, and then we will enter into this phase of reviewing. It means that 1.9 billion will not be received in May, and we will have a budget gap. That is why I think that this is not a very good alternative for us. So we perceive this version as the final one. And could you provide some examples, speaking of something which is not abundantly clear or concrete? Yes. For instance, increasing the energy tariffs. I don't really have the text in front of me, but I think that is mentioned there that by the end of 2025 or 2026, 2026. So from this version, I understand that by the end of 2026, the energy tariffs are not going to change. Am I right? But it seems a little bit strange because this, we know it that that is something that we really need to do it in a gradual fashion as based on this document. So what about this information being not specific or concrete enough? But am I correct in my interpretation? Yes, but you say that it is not specific enough. So it is mentioned there that the tariffs will not change. Okay, so returning to the question that you asked, so what is not clear about that? What exactly is not clear about this? Well, yes, but I think that speaking of commitments, this is about studying of concepts and development of concepts about the review of tariffs and how to form. I think that this is about the studies and the research. Colleagues, but we also have the second part of the panel, and unfortunately, we do not have enough time for the discussion. Yaroslava, you're ready to take your question. Make sure that you use the microphone, but the plan that we had published at the end of December, there was also another reform, an accounting reform. Well, it was not published at the end, yes, but it was voted for on the 29th of December. I published it. What about this provision? Why do we no longer have it? I don't, I don't really know. We have the audit provision, and those institutions responsible for the audit of the plan, for them, it is very important to take these measures because that would translate into their capability. Yes, well, I'm sorry probably for wrapping up this discussion, but I would like to express gratitude to Oleksii. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for a lot of work you've been doing throughout the past months. We will go back to this plan. It has 380 pages, I guess, and there are many reforms mentioned there. So within these monitoring events and our activities, we will really unpack everything, and everyone will focus on their area of activities. I would like to invite our panelists for the second part. Thank you for your participation, dear colleagues. And that is something I've been looking forward to because today we have Tetiana Kovtun with us. She's an executive director of the Office of Reform of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, and Alexander Zheleznyak, uh, a member of the parliament who represents the Committee on Finances. And the first question I would like to address to Tetiana, because together with the World Bank, Tetiana has done a lot of work, and I think that that is something that could be compared to the preparation of the Ukraine plan. we have one reform matrix. Moreover, we have different sectors, different areas. We can see different cross-cutting events. Also, we have this reforms matrix. So, could you please tell us more about this tool and also about the governmental priorities? Thank you, Maria, for having me here. There is a presentation. But Maria, you already mentioned everything we've accomplished because, of course, this is not such an immense work which was done by the Minister of Economy with regard to the Ukraine plan, given very limited timelines. I think this is impressive what they've done. But I would like to mention a couple of words about the context. But before that, I would like to check how much time I have for this presentation. There are 7 minutes. Oh, yes. So probably that I will use this time to explain the background and the context. What the civil society is doing, I think that it has been to some extent defined as the context because I've been a little bit late joining you when you already discussed midterm budget planning. But now we find ourselves in this situation when we have money exchanged for reforms and also reforms exchanged for our path towards the European Union. That is why we talk a lot about reforms and conditionalities. We also have recommendations, also what we perceive as conditionalities to some extent, they're our choice because it is about the expansion and everything we are doing together with the EU. So, what are the objectives that we set out all the documents that Ukraine has undersigned or when we have some negotiations. The key objectives is systemization and also creation of an analytical tool for the government and also for civil society, for the parliament, for other partners to be able to analyze how Ukraine complies with all the recommendations and also what concerns reforms, because we definitely take a lot of interest in that. There are very many reforms. It is 230 something for this year only, and we understand that they are numerous. However, they're very critical as far as the European integration is concerned or financial commitments. Well, probably you will not see much from this slide, but I would like to explain more the idea and why it is the World Bank and why do we focus so much on the reforms matrix. We would like to conduct an analysis and with some other colleagues who are present, some of whom are present here, we've started this activity to analyze all these conditionalities and how they impact our economic development progress. And just to put it very simply, some of them do not have a direct impact. Some of the elements which are needed for economic growth, they are not envisaged by any of these reforms or conditionalities. That is why this is not a trivial objective. However, we've been discussing it with partners that if we coordinate these reforms to make sure if they are not aimed at economic growth, but at some additional measures, the creation of institutions, development of strategies, all of that is money-wise is costly, and also it takes very many activities or steps to be taken. At the end of the day, it doesn't lead to the result. That is why this is the question that we have for 2025, 2026, whether Ukraine without donors would be able um, to pull it to pull it off. Also, with regard to methodology, it is important for us to focus on each and every of these conditionalities. There are 230 conditionalities envisaged, not only for this year, because it is also about some 50 laws to be adopted, and also there is some duplication. I think it half of them. It means that donors are holding different discussions. They are trying to find an agreement, and some conditionalities they are mentioned twice or three times in different documents, enlargement reports, the Ukraine plan, IMF, DPL, US priority list. These are our key documents. 69% are recommendations, 31% are conditionalities. The majority of reforms imply activities to strengthen the capacity of institutions. It's a law enforcement block, prosecutor's office, border guard service, anti-monopoly service, security service of Ukraine. There are very many questions that donor have. Structural reforms. This is Gov Ukraine plan or DPL, and macro fiscal stabilities amounts to 10%. This is a well-known representation pertaining to clusters. We try to analyze everything in terms of the correspondence to different chapters of key, and this is a challenge to donors which are not part of the European Commission, and it is very important actually to align everything pursuant to the requirements of the European integration because it is our um, key aim. This is well, the same idea. I think that yes, I've taken 7 minutes. Yes, absolutely. It is a very nice frame for us as analysts to see the results of the work, also to see a very good and clear structure of all of these conditionalities. That is really important. And speaking of the European integration, which is mentioned there, that is critical. That is something uh, what is lacking. And also, Yaroslav, Yaroslav, the person who will be partially responsible for the implementation of all these commitments in the Supreme Council. And I have two questions here. So the first question is, I know that you are very active working from the international perspective with the monetary conditionalities and generally working with different international organizations. It's from top of my head. What about the leverage of international practitioners? What are the tendencies that we can see before, in times of war, post-war? What are the tendencies that we will witness? And there is, yes, yes, I will not ask this one because yes, I have this question, but I will, yes, I just decided to take it away.
Then how do you see the risks of voting for all those things we have promised by this convocation of the parliament? How difficult will it be? Well, let me specify just a couple of moments. I'm not going to be evasive today. I'll speak honestly. First of all, we don't have a political crisis in the parliament. It's just the impossibility for several people just to, well, adopt certain. So, an example, even today when we are well, a bit, well, trying to educate the coalition. Well, the draft law, which was really necessary, was adopted by 290 votes. Other things were not. That's simple. Then, secondly, if it is connected with the money, they may like it, they may not like it. The Taro Shurmin or somebody else may like or dislike it, but the parliament will adopt it. And even if the condition is that we have to adopt it standing on one leg, well, it might cause some inconveniences, but we'll adopt it. The third one is international requirements are the only political will for reforms. I don't see any other. Well, I'm sorry for saying that, but this formula, money for reforms, this is the only thing that works to facilitate reforms right now. So not to, well, speak much. Well, the law on the Bureau of Economic Security was not registered for a year before, well, this. Well, there was the version of Tatarev and Maluska and Sverdenko said it was a great one. But so once again, this is now the only mechanism for promotion of reforms. in my mind, well, unfortunately, not all members of the parliament understand that, but the understanding that we will get at least 15 billion financing less next year because we will take like 16 out of the facility, that's obvious. So the task of the members of the parliament right now is to think of how to bridge this gap. We haven't done anything at the moment. Well, yes, the corporate management was adopted, but it was not because of the political will. Well, maybe somebody had it, but it's just because it was a requirement. The law on the Securities Commission, a great example, still not signed because a friend of a head of the office of the president really wanted to have a salary raise. But, well, this law could not be adopted without the World Bank. And the same comes to the IMF and hopefully also the American financing. Now, what concerns the plans, well, yes, we have voted for politically exposed persons and returned the declarations. And believe me, it was, well, much more difficult to vote for it than any laws on bankruptcy or whatever we have here. What concerns Ukraine plan, I don't like it. I think it's the weakest document of the ones we had. You may like it or not like it, but let's speak about facts. I have opened this plan. So for 2024, there are 10 billions left, and we have 10 objectives for the parliament. Out of them, the Bureau of Economic Security, which we saw the government was preparing, the only thing. Everything else are just, well, the things I cannot even call the reforms. So for 1.5 billion, the World Bank did, well, three reforms. So expectations and reality are different. So I don't know. We will not have these risks in the parliament. There are risks in other places. So the message is very simple. The message for our foreign colleagues, the more ambitious they are, well, in the reforms of the customs, and well, 100 billions were stolen, and well, concerning conditionalities in NPLs. Because there is a solution, a draft law, but it's not on the plan. In the reform of the accounting chamber, it's not simply, I'm not simply mentioning it. We had a situation when we were simply ignoring that. But who will be lobbying that? The people who were appointed by Tatarov to the accounting chamber?
Also, another reform amendments by Lazoway, also to make sure that everything is in order in the prosecutor's office. And there are very many things which I did not see. I mean, I can continue. That is why I hope that there will be some proposals which will channel the focus a little bit because, well, maybe I'm very straightforward, but plans and strategies and concepts, it is great. But I don't really see what happens next when it comes to implementation. That is why I would like to see very specific steps. I would like to see about these 15 billion of gap being covered the next year. Also, we have very many questions here. And another announcement a month ago, we created a document about the control over international commitments. I would like to express gratitude to the governments for their reforms matrix. We've improved it slightly. We added some provisions, the status and those who are responsible. Oleksii is also a member. We have three members of committees, and in 2 weeks, we will officially invite the representatives of the government, and we will also have these questions about timelines for implementation. It will be very important for me to learn about the draft law from Mr. Maluski because by the 10th of March, they were supposed to be ready with their proposal. Yes, it's very important because it is about funding and also about signing another draft law, the National Commission on Securities. I think that it's very important because a lot depends. I mean, the security of our state.
So, well, maybe it's not very optimistic, but I have already told you I'm not going to be a very pleasant person in our discussion today. So I don't see any problems in the parliament. If this is connected with the money, we will vote for it. DPL, corporate management, capital market, agrarian, well, things. Well, we had almost 300 votes in one day when we saw a connection with the money. I see the lack of certain political will, so it would be great if the formula money for reforms worked efficiently. Unfortunately, when it comes to the American money, we have reforms, but no money. And when it comes to the European reforms, the money is available, but the reforms have to be more ambitious. Thank you. Thank you, Yaroslav. And to all those listening to us on Zoom and on Facebook and other platforms, if we are broadcasting and live streaming that there, I would like to remind you that we have a chat and a Q&A sections where you can ask questions, and I'm checking everything on my phone, and I will be asking the questions. Mm, and before we proceed to Q&As, I would like to ask Alexandra to respond to what she's heard and draw some conclusions. Thank you, dear friends. First of all, I would like to go back to the question of the accounting chamber. We have several members of the accounting chamber who are about to lose their powers, and as there represent 7 of them, as has been told. So this is a big number. And as public, we were hoping that the law will be prepared quite quickly, and the new law on accounting chamber will be adopted, and we will have new members, transparent competition, real competitions. There's no law, and we should probably not hope to have a totally new procedure there, but we are basically freezing the things that we have right now. If the American money comes with certain conditions, well, I sure they will. Well, I liked Yaroslav's speech today because he was very optimistic today, saying that we will have the money, the parliament will vote, because today I wrote in my post that Parliament in a coma. So now I will have to change that so we can expect to have the reforms. Thank you, and thank you for the corporate law. I was looking forward to its adoption. It was well, pending for many years, but it's very timely. And coming back to what Yaroslav mentioned, we have a problem with financing even this year, but we're speaking about the next year, about the year 2026. We were waiting for Ukraine facility, and we'll get more money than we are getting this year. Well, that's not 1/4, but this year it's 1/4, but not 1/4, but more. But that means we will get less next year. So the government and the parliament should understand where to get money from next year. And this is what medium-term budget planning possible. And this 3-year declaration is very important in that regard, because that should show us what is planned by the government for the next 3 years. To be able to fund the budget expenditures, because yes, we had this year's financing is very problematic. It will be a bigger problem next year, and I'm not even saying anything about 2026. So a lot will depend on well, what the war scenario will look like. So all our taxes, why do we need to pay taxes right now? Why do we have to be honest in paying our taxes? Because this is the basis for financing our defense and security. We have to be very thorough in doing everything we do, like where we buy something, how we pay our taxes, and so on, because this is about our defense capacities. We have to take into account in our strategy. We have to think about the future, because even after the war, we will have to finance the army. We have to maintain it as a strong and capable force, but that requires additional funding. Thank you. Thank you, Alexandra. Dear colleagues, so would you like to add something? Yes, I like your optimism in terms of the budget. I'm afraid that we don't know what budget we will have in 2 months. So let's be honest, we have now a gap of 300 billion. If we don't mobilize anyone additionally, we don't know how to, well, cover this gap. And when it comes to medium-term budget planning, it's a great thing, and you can't even imagine how much effort it took to vote for it. And Serhiy Marchenko started with that, but then Oksana Markarova managed to actually um, get it adopted. And it's interesting that Serhiy is now the one who is supposed to implement it. But symbolism apart, if we miss not just the amount of money, but just the regularity, let's be honest. We're now not working much with the trust of our partners, and when we ignore the levels from the letters from G7, that's a bad thing. When we mm, just will tell our partners that the accounting chamber is not in play anymore, and so on. These are bad things, and at some point, as it happens usually, we will somebody will come to the parliament and say, we don't have any money. We need to do the sequestration. And for me, as a person who worked with a budget this year a lot, I can tell you that there's not much to sequestrate. So this is a big challenge this year, and it will be even a bigger challenge next year. And even when it comes to taxes, I'm not a big fan of taxes. I don't think that they are efficient in many situations, but we do understand that today, when IMF, the board, is having a meeting, they will not be defining the new benchmarks. So will we be increasing the taxes? No, but this is the time we're losing, and it's not. It's like treating a serious disease. You cannot ignore it because it's getting worse and worse. And except regular treatment, you might need a surgery in the end. And that's the problem. And then the last fact is something I dislike a lot, is that lately I mean the representatives of the bodies of powers, we are trying to do the minimum necessary things. So if it is indicated by the IMF that we have to do this right now, so we're trying to do it, well, barely the bare minimum. And we need to do more. We have to overperform, not because we want to be loved by everyone around and to be given more money, but if there's no money, this is our problem first and foremost, and we will feel it very quickly because considering the war, it's becoming a problem of life and death. Yes, ambitions is something we lack, but sometimes it's also the uh, threat of losing the trenches. Well, I like this idea of being ambitious, especially well, we'll have now a quotation from this facility. It's not, well, an exact quotation, but I know that when it was developed, but only that was to support the political ambitions by financial resources. I liked this idea very much. So we are proceeding to the Q&A session, and I have one question from Zoom, and if there are some questions from the audience, we will be able to take one question from the audience as well, maybe two questions from Zoom, and that will be it. And then we will proceed to, well, the networking phase, because that's a very rare um, um, for, rare situation. So we have a question to Yaroslav from Irina Kosa. So the question is, I'm very pleased that the parliament is ready to vote for all the necessary laws, but it is a pity that the reform of Zheleznyak is scheduled for 2025 only. What is the reason of this? And since the law has been ready for a long time. Well, that is, well, what I'm saying. So if we voted for it right now, so how can we have there the items for 2024, well, or the ones that will be in DPL for, well, September this year? This is a good news for Irina, probably. So this will be in September this year. But the bad news is that instead of replacing this benchmark for something else, we keep it just to imitate, well, that we are doing something. If our task is to get the money, then okay, that's a different story. But if it's about giving financial incentives to the reforms, we can say that this is a lost opportunity. And in this regard, there are several laws which have been voted for and they are signed. So what are they doing there in this plan? If it's just a simple for formality, let us just say that way. Okay, I expected a different story. But I guess Irina will be happy to know that by September, this law should be voted for and signed. On behalf of Irina, I would like to thank for this piece of news. And in fact, the reform matrix will help a lot in this regard. I think because we all will be able to see very clearly what conditionalities are there in what agreement and so on. Thank you. I'm not sure who this question is to. I would like to have a discussion about this, in fact, because we're speaking about Ukraine facility and Ukraine plan. We're talking about them as something like the IMF plan. So we have the requirements, and because of this, Ukraine will get money. But there's a lot related to investment, including 20% to the regions and a certain percentage to Green Deal and green transition, and also supporting different projects and not just some great projects like nuclear energy, which would require 20 years of construction, but the projects which will develop the sectors in the regions. So, where is this entrance point in the government to discuss this? Because it's obvious that some business sectors have survived, some are developing and exporting, and they are ready to come and think and discuss how to use this resource for our common interests and common good, but somehow it's not discussed at the moment. Thank you, Roman. Yes, the second pillar is a very important and interesting topic. Yes, I would like just to mention a couple of words about the context because we can see that Ukraine facility in many respects was written based on what was called Recovery and Resilience Facility in the European Union. And the mechanisms of monitoring and control, the mechanisms of reporting, the mechanism of the second pillar are very similar. So this is not the macro financial aspect. This is not IMF. This is the mimicry of RF with consideration of the fact that the funds obtained by Ukraine will go to cover the state budget deficit. The countries which received the RRF, this were Italy, Poland. Well, Poland had certain delay, but they did get it, and we have very interesting reports which were published. So all this money went for investment projects, and that's a big difference because we cannot say that the funds from Ukraine facility of Pillar 1 will go to for something else except covering for deficit. But when it comes to the second pillar, the idea is to establish the mechanism and reform the system of public finance administration. So it's not only about using the funds, but it's also about establishment of a system which will give Ukraine the opportunity to use the funds from structural funds of the EU in future. All the mechanisms which have to be created in Ukraine should be developed for well the purposes of the second pillar, and there are big questions about the medium-term budget planning, prioritization of investments, about what a public investment project is, and how the respective ministers and local governments can actually get into this single project pipeline, which we have to achieve in the end. So, in a way, this is also a process for preparing us to join the European Union.
Ukraine plan, Victoria has demonstrated that there are three different pillars that we have. This is part of the mechanism of Ukraine facility. And the Ukraine plan is about the first pillar. This is budget support. These are reforms. And this is the very first pillar which defines budget support. The second one is the investment pillar, and this is exactly so. In fact, it means that now, with regard to the second pillar, we are still working on the tools in the document which is being adopted right now. I mean, the European requirements, it is mentioned there that the key role will be played by the European Investment Fund. And right now, they are working on these tools, the mechanism for compensation of loans for on of interest for loans. These are guarantee mechanisms for insurance and as well as others. The idea was that primarily the Ukraine plan focuses on the first pillar, and the second component, the second pillar, comes separately, but the intersectoral part of it, when the government wants to define a priority areas for investment. However, in the Ukraine plan, this is what I asked Oleksii about 4 billion hryvnias for investment criteria. And it is mentioned there that this is the support of agrarian sector as well as other fields, but it is not about the sum demonstrated by Victoria in the second pillar. Well, yes, but on Tuesday there was a discussion with the participation from experts of UNIT. And they know that the majority of international banks, they work with large-scale projects. That is why it is very important for us to understand how they can scale down for small scale and medium scale projects also to work. Well, the lead, this is the European Investment Bank, and KfW will also play a certain role there. KfW, they know how to work with our fund of support of entrepreneurship when there were some money earmarked for the compensation of in loan interest, and we understand that I'm not sure whether they will use this mechanism, but it's quite plausible, and also there will be some loans. And there will be some limitations, of course, that we do not give this money to oligarchs by also this mechanism with KfW and also the cooperation which we already have. And I think that it is very probable that they will also support this activity. Yes, DFC project, and together with Lviv Bank, you will see this example of a scale down when they provide some guarantees for a loan portfolio. And this is one of very interesting mechanism. It could also be something for insurance against war risks. Yes, I think that this is the way the EBRD also works. So we already have these mechanisms, and it is about the way these mechanisms will be applied. Also, it is about the absorption capacity, especially on the ground and in regions. And I think that we do not have any questions from our online participants, and the participants here. I would like to express gratitude uh, to our partners for organization of this event. I would like to wish you a great day and also to have good reforms because we definitely need them.